Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
Wow, you went there. You did go there. Okay. All right. Anyway. Cool. Yeah. Well, right, exactly, yeah.
Should I come up here? Over here? Yeah, let's go in the bench. Okay. Terrific. It's been a while since I've been up here.
I know you're right there right now. Yeah. Well, I tried to read Albers because I was reading relationships, but like wasn't. I don't like reading school. It's not necessarily. I don't all the time, but it's also like if I read for school or work, but I don't want to do that. Yeah, I know. Did you read the Untitled Chapter?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I don't know about
Well, I'm actually reading it for that's why it's not really for pleasure. I just want to burst your bubble, but no, it's and it's about because I want to do something on essays for defamation. So it's all about the Sullivan case and sort of the history behind it. So it's super interesting. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, well, that's cool. I see what mine is like really great. The government, they were like never like actually contesting the court, like as being individualized, like in negotiations.
Right. I mean, what are you gonna say? Was it me? Well,
Yeah.
there was a radar that said it was you. So
Yeah.
outside of you arguing that it wasn't calibrated properly, I don't know what you're gonna say.
My attorney got an A in internal police
Mm-hmm.
intersection which there is no like lane
Oh.
to it. So he did go to court on that.
Okay, that was I went to court once. Right.
And you got a It really matters.
Like how they did it. Budget too.
And you have parking ticket. I just have all those recently. I'm like, please, I don't make any money. I was at 7:02 and they start ringing at 7 in the morning, like downtown. At 7:02, the meter being staying up at yeah. Like the next morning. Because there's 3 after 6 p.m.,
I
right?
can't believe how that's so ridiculous.
Where do you guys grab water?
All right.
No. Water? I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I'm very excited. To make a little trip out of it. Going to Cape Cod with college friends after. Excited.
Well, you were really after because that's your last.
Of course.
Good for the class size. It's more fun to do.
Try.
I was broadly successful, except for when I borrowed a credit card.
Apparently, I'm really exactly your mom, so yeah,
So how many times am I just gonna run into you?
I know, every time, I know, I see you everywhere. It's pretty cool. I get to see my
Oh,
friends.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Okay, great. Also, I ran to Emily too, just walking down the street the other day.
Oh yeah. Right.
I know, so scary. Tell me about the flip.
I actually called that because I've been getting like harassing telemarketing phone calls every day, and that's who you file a complaint with. Yeah, like every day they get me phone calls. Like the only option really is to change my number. So I already put on like just do not call. Like an actual.
Yeah.
I say, please take me off your list. I don't understand. And then I call back, and then the number disconnects each time. I don't get it.
I like getting free consultations with my county.
Yeah, totally. Oh, cool. That's good.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I sent her one.
So have I given you one of these already?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I have too.
Okay, sounds good. My kids like them.
Family.
It's all good. Thanks.
You guys moved fast.
What's that? How do you mean? Yeah, we got one done. Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How are you?
Good. Yeah, no, it worked out really well for us.
I love it. I love how everything worked out.
Yeah.
Especially like now, like I can see that one of them back in the
Here,
If it were only so easy, like
yes, right? I mean, it'd be simple if we could do it that simply every time.
So you're still are you still looking at like
No, we got OCS next week, Wednesday, for case, and we'll do the stay a couple weeks later.
Okay.
What is unclear to me is whether we're going to do a 3-person 2L class next year.
Okay.
And our 1L will be from Marshall this year.
Okay.
We're trying to go back and forth.
Oh, okay.
Now, if we don't find a candidate, we'll give you guys a call. But,
Okay, and that's a different city.
so,
Okay, great.
but so I don't know.
But you at least have a spot for it this summer.
Yeah, at
Maybe
least I'd like to do a three-person class again. Because I think we're going to lose various things, family choices and stuff like that. So,
But overall, things feel like they're going well.
oh yeah, can't complain. Can't complain.
You have good people there. All right, well, sit wherever you like. And also, there are box lunches over here.
I'll take a look. Oops, sorry.
Oh, right. That's a shame. And you've always had that one.
Really?
And sure enough, when he had to fill out like a graduate survey, he's like, you had said that 2 years ago, and you were right. You're on your way. Yeah. And I think that says something about the type of people they are and the type of people they are. Oh, great. Wait, she has an actual office, yeah. So she just took her car? Or that was last finishing her first year? Oh, right. Yeah. Does it take off on the council or just a different head every day?
Matt,
Because ours is not even in your nature to do that. But it's a no to learn. Yeah, and also to learn. So yeah, to know that we need to,
no, that's fine. I just,
with like a, maybe like higher level. Great. Oh, okay, cool. Are you like that? No, we're not actually. I mean, I guess like your portfolio is Oh, yeah.
It does. I don't, I think I had one class in this room. Yeah, I think so, but I don't recall.
Were you the same year, graduation?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I graduated the same year as you. I think we've talked about this, but from Cleveland Marshall.
Yeah.
Well, right. Well, this is being recorded, and we're going to have a link for students who couldn't attend. I know, sorry. Oh, right, everything I'm saying, yeah.
I think I had Rita for Trout Day. Did you really? I did, and then I recall not showing up very much.
Rita? Rita's listed his last name. Okay.
Rita and some AUSA. One of the guys at the AUSA, so it's not there anymore.
Maybe. Yeah, I know. I was like, exactly. I was gonna say Marlon Prime. He's at the Marlon Prime.
No.
He would not have been teaching that.
And then
Because I think he's younger. He's the new CMBA president. That's right.
yeah, yeah.
And she got the judge to sign. I think you're both Did you?
We did too when we went to Shaker, and I was like, I feel we're on Southwest
Where?
between Warrington and Sheffield, almost to Van Aiken. So I took the route.
Other area.
Are you in Shaker too?
Where?
Yeah, by Lamont.
I started going to school around Ridley. Now we're on Woodbury between South and Shea.
Oh, Osprey. Oh, okay, great.
It's like the second time, yeah, the first time you turn left, the second right across the boulevard.
That's where my kids are.
Well, not anymore. My youngest is 13, so.
Did they?
Sarah did. The older two went to Norfolk.
Okay. Yeah, ours is both.
Nope.
Fourth grade and first grade football.
Senior, junior.
And actually, they spent at the high school.
Senior, junior.
Well, our kids are spending time at EC, which is right outside of mine.
My, well,
Actually, it's for my
not
little
your
one
kids, but
graduated
my
from
kids.
grade
Yeah.
school.
Where the kids, actually Sussex out of it.
Exactly. That's why I said I could send both of them.
Yeah, it's like a neighborhood.
Yeah, but also great. Not Carol. Right.
Well, except right, because Carol's not full day. He's had never. I give him quite a smack, so I can show you.
Oh yeah.
No, he's a great winner. He's got full day, full year.
They do infants.
18. Oh, no, actually, no.
Oh, no? Okay.
Yeah, because
Yours
daycare
will
closed down.
close down.
It had to be 18. Yeah.
You're on the waiting list.
Yeah, ideally.
She's got babies.
Yeah, they're at the English doctor right now. Fortunately, Jeff old enough. He was 18. Actually, he's 2 years old. I think now like 2 years old. But at the time I was that age, he was crying.
Oh yeah.
Real challenge. Really? Yeah, yeah. 6 months and ready to go. And they're both there together? Yeah.
That makes sense. Even for your convenience, right?
Together, yeah.
One drop off.
Oh yeah.
We have 7 that are still like 8. Yeah, Opal's is actually too old for clinic, but I call him
Right.
so one drop off.
He can mentor these younger kids.
Well, no, it was the summer school program that they had. It's supposed to be only grade 8 and 9.5.
Oh, okay.
But he wanted to do it. Yeah, the little one is actually pushing 6.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Mine are like your, well, not quite as old, but soon to be freshmen and soon to be middle schooler. The big changes. Lakewood City School. Yeah.
I want to do more of like, working with people
Find the right
for chapter.
Yeah. And I grew up on the east side, so I'm not one of those, west side or bust,
Yeah.
but
My husband's from the west side.
yeah.
I know, I will not get done totally. I'm sure that will not be the case. I hope I never have to do that a lot.
That'll work.
6 more years and I start paying taxes.
Oh.
When she's up in school.
So then you're moving?
Out of shape.
But you still have to pay taxes. Oh, I thought you meant like there's some kind of like abatement
No, no,
program.
no,
I'm like,
no.
oh, what is this program? Maybe I'll move. Yeah. Yeah.
You'll actually pay off your mortgage, but you still have to pay
Pay the taxes. Yeah, the taxes never go away.
Just do it.
I'd better take a look and see if. Yeah. I'm gonna take a look and see if Carol's here. Maybe we should get started pretty soon.
And then come back.
The amount of soil over there is good.
Yeah.
I understand. But once you get past that, your chemicals,
Right. So it's when my oldest son is like, it's happening. And
I did, but
so,
right.
and I'm looking and I'm like, they're out.
We've been on.
Not quite there.
Did you see small schools? Northwestern, Chicago,
A lot of business and a lot of variety.
Hey, thanks for joining us, for those of you who could make it. This is being taped. I can provide the clip to you guys and the folks that are actually not in the city, so that was their reason for not being here. With early interview weeks happening earlier and earlier, it seems every year, some of your classmates are still at places all around the world. But thank you for being here. We are really lucky and just grateful to have our esteemed panelists with us today. I'm going to go ahead and read their brief bio, and then I'll have some questions, but really more importantly, I hope you all have some questions. This is just really helpful, right, for interviews that start as early as Monday. So directly to my right is, and can you hear me? Okay, all right. Is Nicole Braden Lewis. She is counsel at Tucker Ellis's Cleveland office. She received her BA summa cum laude from Denison and her JD magna cum laude from Case Western Reserve School of Law, where she was Order of the Coif. Ms. Braden Lewis defends companies across the country and locally in Ohio as both national and local counsel. At Denison, she majored in religion, and she puts her liberal arts background to use every day as she learns more about her clients' products and businesses and explores the scientific defenses applicable to her cases. In asbestos litigation, she represents product manufacturers and premises owners who have been in business since the days when asbestos was widely used and now find themselves defendants in lawsuits. And this and her other areas of practice, she communicates closely with clients to develop a case strategy at the outset of a matter through trial if necessary and to help avoid further litigation in the future. And she also applies lessons learned from this litigation defense work to counsel manufacturers in other industries on product safety. Welcome. You're welcome. Then to her right is Matt Albers. He is a partner in the Voorhees Cleveland office. If you're wondering how to pronounce it, I believe it is Voorhees.
It varies with an L.
And a member of the healthcare group. He received his BA in political science from The Ohio State University and JD magna cum laude from Case Western School of Law. He was also a member of the Order of the Coif. He advises in all areas of healthcare law, but focuses his practice on healthcare mergers and acquisitions activity. Mr. Albers has significant experience in the areas of clinical device and pharmaceutical research, NIH and industry grant funding, related intellectual property issues, and the integration of the clinical and academic components of an academic medical center. In addition, he represents clients in response to government investigations from the Office of Inspector General, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and Food and Drug Administration. Prior to joining Voorhees, he spent years serving as the Associate General Counsel for UH, specifically working with UH's University Hospital's Case Medical Center, and prior to that, he was at Voorhees. Thank you and welcome. And last but certainly not least, we have Carol Rondon. Carol is a partner at Baker Hostetler's Cleveland office. She received her BA summa cum laude and her JD cum laude, both from Northwestern University. Former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Ms. Rondon possesses a wealth of experience in a range of matters, including criminal prosecution, private defense, and civil litigation. As the first woman to serve as the first Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, and later as the United States Attorney, she both supervised and personally handled high-profile cases crisis-level litigation, and much of which involved intense public and media scrutiny. She also oversaw and personally handled high-profile civil litigation, including as lead counsel on the consent decree, providing comprehensive reform for the Cleveland Division of Police. Ms. Rondon helped establish the Northeast Ohio Business Ethics Coalition, the U.S. Attorney's Heroin and Opioid Task Force, and the Northeast Ohio Cybersecurity Consortium. She has significant experience managing crisis-level commercial, regulatory, and criminal matters with a particular depth of knowledge regarding the FCPA, RICO, and monitorships, as well as advising clients on structuring compliance programs to help avoid such problems. Previously, she was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, and prior to that, a litigator in private practice. So welcome. All right, let's get started with a pretty basic question that I hope you can all answer. How do you suggest students prepare for interviews, and what do you expect them to know before walking in the door?
Okay, so for starters, you should never be late to an interview. And I apologize for walking in late. I actually got a phone call from the court, and I had that moment where I was like, okay, do I pick it up? Do I not pick it up? Because you can recognize the court number. It was the wrong decision this time. So anyway, with my apologies. So look, there are a lot of things that you can and should know going into an interview. In particular, when you're going to a callback interview at a law firm, you're going to know in advance who you're going to see that day. Go figure out who they are. Make sure that you know when you walk into somebody's office who that person is. You can recognize their face from having looked at their profile online. You know what areas of practice they're engaged in. You know something about their background. Maybe they went to the same college you did. You know, and speak into the microphone. Okay, sorry about that. I have such a loud voice. I never use microphones, which all of my boys can attest to. So you really want to make sure that you really know not just the firm, but the actual people who you're going to be talking to. And in particular, if you have friends who have been at that firm or know people at the firm, try to find out something about them as people, too, so that you'll feel more comfortable when you walk in to talk to them. So information is always powerful. Knowledge is what you want, because then you're going to project that level of confidence. And quite honestly, people always like it when somebody's talking to them and already has spent some time figuring out who they are and what they do. So that would be my first suggestion.
I would add to the part about being late. If you are late and it's because the directions on the law firm's website were wrong, don't say that. Just say that you got called on in class and couldn't leave early like you had plans. That happened to me. So I agree with what Carol said. My suggestion for preparing for your interviews is to not only be ready to talk about your successes, but we will ask questions about your challenges that you faced and also mistakes that you've made and what you learned from them. So be ready with those as well. We can tell if you're completely surprised by a question, and that's something we want to hear about, is how you've learned from your mistakes. And if you do have a story to tell about, for example, I always ask questions about how you've been a positive and a negative influence on others. And follow up. So if you have a story about how you helped someone, and I ask you, how did things turn out for that person? You should have an answer. Don't just say, oh, I don't know. I don't know what happened to that person that I helped and, had a positive influence on. So think about how you'll be presenting those kinds of examples, because if you can learn from your mistakes, that is a strength, and we want to hear about it.
I would only add maybe a counterpoint a little bit to both, which is that only do those things to the extent you're comfortable doing them, because if you're uncomfortable talking to somebody about their practice because you read a 5-second bio on their website and you want to talk to me about healthcare regulation, well, if you're interested in it, that's great. Let's talk about it. If you really have no interest in it, that's fine. You don't have to. You don't need to know all that stuff. So temper the amount of information. I had a candidate who had come and do an interview with me who had gone back and pulled my law review note and read it and wanted to talk about that. And I can't remember what it was about. I don't know how it started. I don't know how it ended. And it was a little weird that somebody did that much research about me. That was a little much. So just do the level. To me, and I'm a very sort of informal interview. If ever you're in a room with me, you'll find that out. But I want to see that you're comfortable. I want to see that you're confident, because in that moment you can give the best representation of yourself. So if you're very uncomfortable with the notion of doing a whole lot of personal background research on someone, that's okay. Do enough to have some familiarity with who that person is so you can see them in the hallway and say, hello, Matt, or hello, Carol. That's good, but be yourself in an interview. Don't necessarily try to, do the research in the background so that you're trying to present yourself as someone you're not. That will come through.
Right. Thank you. So that actually leads right into the next question I had written down. Did you have something to add? Okay. What kind of things would you suggest based on past interviews that people might do differently in preparing, and maybe some common mistakes you've seen to avoid? Anyone can take that first.
Common mistakes I see are people get the name of my firm wrong. They pronounce it Voyeurs, Voyous, Varies. I get all kinds of names for it. It's just varies with an O. It's not that difficult. And if you don't know how to say it or you're unconfident saying it, don't say it. Don't get it wrong. Better to be silent and thought a fool than speak and remove all doubt, right? So there are some mistakes that I think people make that are almost all rooted in trying to present themselves or present a background or a level of familiarity or expertise or knowledge about something that you don't have. So again, people oftentimes read my bio and they want to come in and talk to me about Medicare reform. I get nerded out by that question. I say, let's talk about that. And 3 minutes in, their eyes have glazed over. They have no idea what I'm saying, and I know they have no idea what I'm saying. And that kind of makes the awkward transition back to a conversation we can both talk about. So again, just there's certainly be comfortable, be yourself, be ready to answer questions. But if you don't have an answer, just like a first-year associate, your 3 favorite words are I don't know. That's fine. Feel free to use them because I'm not going to hold it against you if you don't have a great answer to my question. So if I ask you, what kind of donut are you and why, and you look at me like I have 3 heads, A, I expect that, and B, it's okay. So.
Any other common mistakes you've seen that you would?
Part of the common mistakes that I've seen have to do with whether or not people are comfortable in their own skin and feeling confident in that moment. And so one of the things that, everybody always tends to come to an interview with something like this, and they've got their pen and the constant fidgeting is, for whatever reason, is a pet peeve of mine. When I see somebody who's got their pen and they're, whatever they're playing with it or playing with their phone or whatever it might be that's in their hand, their discomfort makes me uncomfortable. And so what you need to know going into these interviews is, look, we want to like everyone, right? Everybody who's gotten a call back to our law firm is somebody who we really like, who we think we might want to have come in, not just spend the summer with us, but we only extend offers to people for the summer who we want to hire. We want everybody who comes to our summer program to succeed and get an offer. So this is very much about us wanting you to be at your best and feel at your best and have a good experience. And so you want to walk into the room with that as sort of the background. And if instead you're walking into the room as like a nervous wreck, it can make the interview process really difficult on both sides. And so you just want to find that place where you're feeling calm and confident.
Well, I'm sorry, I'll jump back in. I've got one other thing this is the only pet peeve I have about interviews because, as I said, I'm pretty informal. If you write it on your resume, I don't care what it is, you must be able to talk about it in detail.
That's true.
So if you write that you were a bar manager at a Las Vegas pool for 2 years between college and law school, I'm absolutely going to ask you about that. And I want to hear something substantive about it. I want to know that you have memories of it. I want to know that you have experiences of it. You have something that you thought either was valuable or terrible about it. I want your perspective on it. So if it's on the resume and you write, some of my interests include, French cuisine, I'm going to ask you about that. So don't write down something that you don't have something substantive to talk about. And if you don't have something substantive to talk about, take it off your resume.
Yep, that's an excellent.
The other mistake I would note is don't ask us to compare ourselves to other law firms, and I suggest you don't talk about your experience with other law firms because we're in the interviewing process to find good candidates for our firm, and we're not interested in explicitly differentiating ourselves. We think that'll come through in the experiences that you have, and it's just kind of an odd thing to be asked.
Just 2 bits of follow-up from both of Carol's and Nicole's answers. We have heard the flip side, though, that some interviewees are maybe aloof and unenthusiastic at the, maybe in an attempt to be confident and comfortable in their skin, they don't seem as engaged. So I think there is a little bit of balance there. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And so part of this process is, look, I mean, anybody who gets a call back to one of our law firms is a really good student, right? And has done really well and has made good grades and presented themselves well in their on-campus interview. So you're all really good candidates. I mean, heck, by virtue of the fact that you're going to law school here, you're all really good candidates. And so, yes, you need to balance that sort of self-confidence with not coming across as if like you're going to walk in the door and be the managing partner because you already know more than everybody that you're talking to during the course of the day. There are clearly going to be subject matters on which you know way more than I do and which you know way more than any of us. But this is a process for you to find out, what does this place feel like to work at? And for us to find out, like, what does this person feel like to be somebody who I'm sitting next to working with? Because you're all really smart, right? So that's like just the baseline given. And it's as much about you finding a law firm, because each law firm, although I agree, you shouldn't ask us to compare and contrast other law firms in large measure because we haven't worked at them, right? So we're comparing and contrasting the, urban legend, which you already know about whatever, name your law firm. ABC law firm is this and XYZ law firm is that. But what you want to do is during the course of that day, that important callback day, figure out, how does this place feel? Do I like these people? Do they seem happy? Do they seem to like each other? When they walk past the support staff in the hallway, do they say hello or not? If that's something, that kind of an environment is important to you. When I'm walking down the hallway, is everybody's door open or closed? Is everybody on the phone? Do people recognize that I'm here interviewing, and do they stop and greet me in the hallway? The general sense of, is this the kind of place where if I close my eyes, I can see myself being in a few years when I graduate?
Thank you. And then, not, I guess, directly on point, but we have had students come back and say after a screener that the firm will say, just keep me updated on the status and where you're interviewing. Is that an okay kind of question to ask, and how much should the student disclose?
Yeah, I never asked that question, frankly, in the process of interviewing you. I'm interviewing you for my firm. It's none of my business where else you're considering. You have lots of options. You should explore all of them. You'd be denying yourself opportunities if you didn't, and you shouldn't feel any pressure in a part of any interview situation to disclose that you're considering Baker and Tucker and Voorhees. That's fine. I expect you to. In fact, I hope you do. The more firms like that want you, the better a candidate you are, and that means, let's have some competition, have some fun, see who we can get in the door. So I'm surprised to hear that question being asked, and if anybody at my law firms, any part of any callback asks you that question, please let me know so that I can speak to them sternly about their interview techniques.
Thank you. Helpful. Okay, so are there any standard interview questions that students should prepare for?
I think that you will be asked for, I mentioned earlier, you will be asked for your strengths and your weaknesses. And when you answer those questions, give them some thought and make sure that you're being genuine in your answers and not just saying what you think we want to hear. Especially, you've probably heard this one on the weaknesses. Don't give a weakness that's really a strength in disguise, like I'm an overachiever or I'm a perfectionist, right? No, but we don't want to hear that.
Too damn hard.
Yeah, don't do that. Give something that's real and that you can support with examples. And like I said, talk about how you became aware of that weakness and what you're doing about it. I think that when you talk about your strengths, if you can give some support for your statement that you are, for example, a dynamic public speaker, talk about times that you have spoken in public and feedback that you've gotten from your audience. So it's not just you thinking, I enjoyed doing that, which is meaningful, but some kind of validation can be helpful for us too, to evaluate what you're saying.
I think oftentimes we don't want to speak about our strengths because we don't want to be perceived as bragging. If an interviewer asks you, what are your strengths, I'm asking you to brag about yourself for a second. Give me something that you like about yourself. Give me something you think is a strength. And feel free to be a little bit, pleased with yourself about it. That's okay. There's a thin line, though, between confidence and cocky, and walk it very carefully because you can talk about yourself in a way that sort of tips over and starts rolling down the hill to be sort of an unattractive characteristic. In terms of standard questions, you won't get any sort of from me anyway, but if you're from out of town, if you're not from Cleveland and you're interviewing at Cleveland firms, you will get asked, why are you in Cleveland? One of the things that, at least as the hiring partner of my firm, that I've experienced over the years is we tend to lose our California associates pretty quick, right? They show up, they work a summer, they have a great time. Cleveland in the summer can be really good, and they have a wonderful experience. We extend the offer, they come back, and February hits, and they say, oh God, no. So, you're going to get some questions about that if you're not from the area, if you're not at least from a comparable area, right? If you're from Buffalo, fine. If you're from Pittsburgh, fine. If you're from Mississippi or, Dallas or Los Angeles, I'm going to ask you some questions about that. What brought you here? The other standard questions I typically ask folks are, what brought you to our door? Why'd you drop for us? As Carol said, you're all smart kids, you're all capable, you're all going to have opportunities at lots of places, and you have choices to make about how you spend your time interviewing and with whom you spend your time interviewing. What was it that prompted you to put one in our little box in the Career Services Officer? Click that button, I guess it is now, to submit for that. Because what I want to make sure is I'm not dealing with folks who are simply dropping for every firm that has, a name of a certain recognition or a starting salary at a certain level or above. I want to know that you have a genuine interest in something that we do or something that we as a firm are, because we're going to invest a lot of time and energy training you and bringing you along. So I want to know that you're part of that investment as well.
And I think you can also expect it, but I hate this question, but I think you can also expect people to ask you, so what kind of law do you think you want to practice? I mean, I got to tell you, like, at so many different points in my career, if somebody had asked me that question, I would have been completely and wholly unable to answer it. And nobody should expect you to know. So if you do know, like if there's something that, speaks to your heart, you're in a joint, JD MBA program and you want to do transactional law and this is why, fine. But there's not that many people your age, quite frankly, there are not that many people my age who know exactly what they want to do and why. And it is perfectly fine to say, I've got a lot of things that I'm interested in. And one of the things that is inviting to me about your law firm is the opportunity to try a number of different practice areas over the course of the summer. Or to be an unassigned associate when I start at the firm and really have a couple of years to explore where I think my interests lie. So be prepared for that, but don't feel like it requires the kind of answer that you think it might require. The other question that I sometimes ask, I don't have any questions that I always ask other than sort of the like basically tell me about yourself kind of a question, is whether or not you've ever faced an ethical challenge. And if so, how did you address it? Because I think in the practice of law today, we all face ethical challenges all the time. And to be able to recognize that they exist and that you're addressing them, I think is really important. And so that's a question that I will not infrequently ask.
So that actually got to one of my questions of, do interviewers expect students to have identified particular practice area interests? And it sounds as though there's some agreement that there is not that expectation.
I agree. If there's a attorney who's interviewing candidates who expects an answer to that, then we've forgotten what it's like to be a student, because when I was a student, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I felt that I should. But your career is a long game. You can change your mind many times. And so if you do answer that question and say that you want to go into, for example, patents, have a reason, because that will be unusual for us to hear that, because most students don't know what they want. So if you're going to answer that question, have some follow-up.
The one other thing that I want to put out there, which I think is probably obvious to all of you, but it just seemed to me to be sort of this crazy system the last time I did it. You do this over and over again, right? So you go from one office to the next office to the next office, and everybody asks you like basically the same set of questions. So one of the things that you need to prepare yourself for is the fact that you're going to be, what is that movie, Groundhog Day, where you just you're like, oh my God, like here we go again. So you've got to get yourself sort of both physically and emotionally prepared for the fact that your day is just going to keep repeating itself, and yet you have to be on each time. Because although you've been, with 3 or 4 different partners of mine during the course of the morning, this is my only 20 minutes with you. And so you need to somehow bring your A game over and over and over again.
I agree. You could be asked the same question 5 times in one day at the same firm. We do not, organize our questions ahead of time. So you could be telling the same story over and over, and you have to be fresh. One other question that I do not ask, but I know is a standard, is what was your Lsat score? You have to know it. If you don't know it, you're hiding something. Everybody knows their own background. I mean, like I said, I don't personally ask that, but if you don't know it, It sounds, I'm serious. What if,
Wait,
to think
show of
about
hands.
it.
Has anybody been asked that question? Show of hands, anyone, please? Thank
So
God.
they're pretty fresh to this. These are Rising 2Ls, but.
Oh, right, fair enough, fair enough.
No, I've never.
Just email me if you could ask that question, and I want to know who asked it. That's amazing.
We'll all
Really?
gang up on that person.
Yeah, because
No?
what would you think if someone said, I don't know, and then they came in a second time and still didn't know?
Mm.
If it's bad, just have an explanation for it. I think that's a much better approach than
Well,
trying to.
Or frankly, don't apologize for it.
Right.
If your LSAT score was 105, you're still a law
Right,
student.
and look what I did with
Right, you
that,
did well enough to
right?
be in
Look
my
what I did
room.
with it, yeah.
It's a
But you can all
standardized test. It
answer
means
that
privilege.
question, right? Like you all know. I would imagine you're not so far removed that you don't know yourself.
Yeah. The only thing I
So that would be,
sorry.
I'll get back to you.
The only thing I would say about answers to questions that are standard or asked is throughout the day you may be asked the same question. Be consistent. You don't have to give exactly the same answer, precisely the same answer. So if you're from California and I ask you what brought you to Cleveland, and you say, oh, my uncle lives here and I used to visit him when I was a kid and really like Lake Erie and wanted to go somewhere different, blah, blah, blah. The next time you don't say my uncle was here and I visited here as a kid and I really like, you can say, I have family here and I've been around the area of the country a lot. I just thought it'd be a nice change. That's fine, as long as it's relatively consistent across the day. What you don't want is, why are you in Cleveland? My uncle lived here. Why are you in Cleveland? Oh, my fiance lives here. Why are you in Cleveland? I got arrested. It doesn't. You have to have the same answer. You know, it has to be relatively the same answer because we do talk about that.
Yeah.
When we're talking about candidates, especially candidates that maybe are on the edge of somebody we think we want to bring in, we'll ask, hey, what did they tell you about this? Because we want to make sure that we're not getting sort of the wool pulled over our eyes a little bit by an answer questions or a question and an answer. So.
Thank you. All very helpful. I have 2 more questions, and we'll open up the floor. One of them I didn't prepare you for, but I think you can think on your feet. Are there particular behavioral interview questions that you ask, and what are you hoping to get from that?
I have at least one that I almost always ask, which is I ask, what makes you laugh? I want to know what you find funny. At least our office of our law firm is a fairly laid-back place, and it's also a fairly no-holds-barred. We like to say the boys' world is tough, wear a cup. So we're going to have some discussions back and forth. Most of them are all good-natured and funny, but if you're somebody who doesn't find that stuff funny, we want to know that we're going to at least be respectful of your sense of humor and your sensibilities as well. But I always ask, what makes you laugh?
I always ask to tell me about a highly functioning team that you're on and a poorly functioning team that you were on, and what you achieved with those teams and what you learned from the poorly functioning team. I think everyone has an example of that, and so now you all have something to think about in preparation for your next interview, because our relationships are important at our firm, and so we want to hear about your experiences working on a team. And as I said before, I also ask about a time that you've been a positive and a negative influence on someone, which I have a lot of candidates really struggle with that because they just haven't thought about. It's hard. You're making yourself vulnerable to talk about a time you were a negative influence on someone. But if you're being honest with yourself and thinking about it, you could probably come up with one.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I will often ask, how do you personally handle stress? I mean, you're all in this pressure cooker that is, law school in America. And so what are your coping mechanisms for handling stress? Which is really just, designed to get at, like, how are you going to deal with the stress of being here as a practicing lawyer? So whether it's, eating chocolate brownies or going for a run or whatever it might be, but again, it's that same sort of honest human connection.
Thank you both. Thank you, all 3 of you. So I think sometimes those questions are getting to, and I think why students sometimes freeze up is you're really prepared to talk about all of these positive things, and now you're being asked questions about overcoming a conflict. So just kind of having some of those answers at the ready, or just think back to your history. Last year, an interviewer from a firm not represented here asked during early interview week, tell me about a time you failed, and she said only one person really had an answer. So, and lastly, are there particular grooming and attire expectations you have?
Yes.
Yes.
So, and I actually think that this is, look, I will start with the baseline. It's not fair. The grooming and attire expectations for women are different than for men. And I can say that as the mother of 3 boys. However, there are grooming expectations for the men as well. So I know, like, there's a whole big thing these days with, like, I'm talking about the men first, with like really odd colored socks that match really odd colored ties, that match really funny looking hair, not on interview day. Okay, I mean, and you'll see in my firm, there are people who dress like that. Actually, people in my firm dress very casually. I don't. It's just a habit that I got into very early in my practice, especially because I was in court a lot and I never knew when I was going to be in court. And as a young prosecutor, the one day that I wasn't in a suit, I had an unexpected arrest and had to go buy a suit. It was the most expensive day in my entire practice of law, and I haven't made that mistake again. So, so you don't, like, that stuff that you think is an expression of yourself, that's not the day to express yourself through your clothing. And collar stays, men, collar stays, because by the end of the day, your collars will be sticking up and everybody will be staring at them. For the women, I don't have a preference as between a pantsuit and a skirt suit. Or even a very, nice conservative dress with a jacket. But you don't want your appearance to be what people remember about you. So you don't want excessive makeup, you don't want crazy hair, you don't want anything that's low cut, that's at all sexually suggestive, full stop. You don't want 3-inch heels, you don't want the nylons with the funny designs on them. You don't want too much jewelry. You really want to be understated. What you want people to remember is you, the person that is you. The external person that is you is like really not that important in the world at all, and should be really unimportant. But when you make it important by the way that you dress, it takes away from us feeling like we've gotten to know who the internal person is. So, and again, it's not that you can't ever express yourself in the way that you dress once you're practicing law, but interview day is not that day. And if you're at all, like, if you get dressed and you're at all concerned that what you're wearing might be too much, it's too much. So just step it back. I used to tell people, dress like you're going to church, but that doesn't work anymore. It's more like dress like you're going to, God forbid, a relative's funeral. Okay?
I would just say that your appearance should not draw attention to it, right? This is the day to be boring. This is the day to be the cover of the Brooks Brothers catalog if you're a guy, and the Brooks Brothers women if you're a woman. Just dress in something that, even if you wouldn't think on any other occasion, I'm going to put this on and feel like this is what I want to wear. Just do that. This is the time for you to talk to us, for you to tell us how your brain works, tell us how you think about things, and give us a window into your personality. If your personality at work includes wearing, turquoise hair and 17 different types of scarves, then okay. Then once you've worked for us for a while and we're comfortable that that's not going to be a dissatisfier for you or us, then fine, then start doing. But interview day is not that day. The only thing I'll say is this becoming more and more the case is we've got a lot more sort of generally acceptable things like tattoos and piercings. I personally, as someone who has tattoos, I don't care, but they're not on my neck, they're not on my face. You won't see them in an interview. I don't want to see yours in an interview either. So if you have them and they're on your forearms or their shoulders, let's cover them up for the interview if we can, just for purposes of, you don't want anybody to draw any conclusion about you from seeing that first, right? It's unfair, but it's the reality. And then if you have things that can be taken out of, things like eyebrows or noses or ears that are, up here or, a little bit outside the norm, again, depending on the firm you're going to and the people that you're interviewing with and how well you know them, you can make your own judgments. But I would just tell you again, be bland on that day for your appearance purposes.
I agree. And you don't want your appearance to distract, and you don't want it to take away from your message, what you're communicating. And that is true on interview day, and it is true every day of your career. Your message and your work is what's most important, so don't let your appearance get in the way of that. You may feel like you're putting on a uniform and you feel boring, like this isn't really me, but that's interview day. That is your uniform. If you look in the bar journals, no one's wearing suits in the bar journals. A lot of law firms are business casual during the day, so they have an interview with someone that's getting for an article. They're not usually wearing suits. That's not your standard for interview day. You still need to wear a suit. Even if you learn that the firm where you're interviewing has a business casual policy, that does not apply to you. You want to step it up and really look your best because this is your first impression and it's important.
Thank you. Any questions from you?
I have a lot of questions. So, starting off with that, in my law talking, what is the best approach? Should you just write them down, wait for them to finish, and sort of go from there? Or is interjecting, or will they kind of guide you about how you should ask questions during the process? Two, with the ethical challenge.
Well, should we take one at a time?
Sure.
Doing one at a time?
Is that okay?
That's a good question.
I'm a very conversational interview, so I rarely try. If I can get you going, I try not to ask you questions. I just want to talk to you. I want to see how you converse with folks. Just in the natural flow of conversation, there's a moment where it's clearly okay or not okay to speak up and ask a question. So if you say to me, hey Matt, what did you do yesterday? What was your normal day like? Is a question we sometimes get. And I start answering you and I'm 3 seconds in and go, wait a minute, what you don't do it then, right? But there's going to be a pause, there's going to be a moment when you might then take to ask a question. So for me, it's just follow the flow of conversation. If you're interviewing with somebody who clearly likes to hear themselves talk, let them talk. Just let them talk to you, because that's 20 minutes where you don't have to do very much heavy lifting at all, and they get to feel good because they talked about themselves or you or the firm for 20 minutes, and they come out going, God, she was great. She just, I really like talking to her. So just let them, don't feel like you have to ask 40 questions if it's not part of the natural discussion. That'd be my answer.
I agree.
And then second one, so on the ethical challenge, you said you like to ask if you face the ethical challenge. If you have, but you want to sort of protect the identity of the party, how would you go about that? And how would you explain?
So exactly that way. I would say, I actually did. I faced an ethical challenge my first year of law school, but I don't want to reveal the identity of the people who were involved. But, we were in a situation where, we were in a group and somebody hadn't completed their outline, and suddenly, magically, overnight, they had an outline for their section of the course, and boy, it ended up looking an awful lot like my neighbor's outline, and I was really concerned, and so this is what I did, but you can anonymize it, absolutely.
That's totally fine.
Yeah, totally fine, totally fine.
I'm sorry, just to piggyback, I'd be concerned if you didn't anonymize it, right? If you start giving me details about the names and the faces of the people that were involved, I don't know that I want to know that, nor am I in a position to know it, and certainly not if it's about classmates of yours that might also be interviewing at my law firm or have interest in other firms around town. That would be, for me, that would be a big, big negative if you were giving me names and identities like that.
But don't take yourself out of the story.
No.
Right. It's your story.
All right, and then the last one, I'm sorry, but I have to push back a little bit because I've definitely heard that you will get the questions you love when you apply to. And so I would love to know, I know that if you're not supposed to, but I've really heard a lot of people that you're going to get that question. So I'd really like to know if somebody asks you that, what is the best way?
So here's one way. Okay, I'm just like making this up out of thin air. If you're really interested in staying in Cleveland, Cleveland is my home. I grew up here. This is where I want to be. So I'm interviewing with all of the major Cleveland law firms because I want to find the best fit that allows me to stay in the city where I want to be.
A great answer.
Having never asked that question, I don't know that I have a good way to answer it. I think had I been asked it, I wouldn't have known how to answer it. Probably would have made me angry in the moment. Yeah. When they asked me what my weakness was, it's answering questions like that. You son of a,
But, the flip side is if you're not just staying in Cleveland, another way to answer that would be, I'm trying to decide if I want to be in Cleveland, D.C., or New York. And so I'm looking at, really top firms in those 3 cities. And at the end of the day, the thing that I'm trying to figure out is which of those 3 cities do I want to be in. Whatever. Turn it into a positive somehow. And so just think that through in your head. But boy, that bums me out that people ask that question.
They're just not thinking hard enough to think of better questions.
Yeah.
I'd be curious, Nicole and Carol, your opinions, because what you just said, like if someone said to me, well, I'm looking in Cleveland, Boston, and New York, and I'm trying to figure out what city is the best fit for me, and it's going to raise all kinds of things in my head about, okay, now wait a minute. They're looking in Boston and New York, which are great cities. I think Cleveland's a great city. I moved here from a larger city to continue my practice, so I love it here, but I'm going, do I want to invest, 10 to 14 weeks of a summer and then maybe a first year in somebody who's got New York sort of stars in their eyes or who's got family in Boston and they interviewed during law. So I'd be curious. To me, that would raise some flags as opposed to being something that I would go, okay, I would prefer
Yeah.
your first answer.
Well, if the first
you know?
answer is
Yeah.
true, you know,
Right.
then yes. But so for me, I guess, and part of it is a little bit different because of, you know, Baker being in all
Yeah, its
those big
footprint is
cities,
bigger,
right?
yeah.
So, you know, that would just lead me into a conversation about, well, have you looked, you know, are you looking at our New York office? Are you looking at our DC office? You know, one of the things that's really positive about Baker is, you know, we have associates who start in New York and decide that, oh my God, this is like really expensive and miserable, and I really do actually want to be at home in Cleveland, and they come home. Yeah, they have huge rats in New York. You know, so for me, that would spark a conversation. But my guess is that answer, depending on the nature of the firm that you're at, could raise concerns as opposed to raise, you know, kind of an interesting conversation point. But think it through and be prepared with a response that is both truthful and positive.
Right. I mean, because you have to answer. You're on the spot.
Yeah.
You know, actually, something Matt said reminded me of a suggestion that I have. You said that you, when I was interviewing, I would ask, what are you working on these days or something, you know, to try to learn about that person's practice. And one time I asked that question, and I think I asked it in a more pointed, like, when we leave this room, what are you going back to, you know, to try to get like a snapshot of what was coming up. And he was surprised and didn't want to tell me because of client confidentiality reasons. So you may encounter that. I was surprised that he was surprised. I thought it was a reasonable question. So my suggestion is, if you want to learn about the person's practice and what kind of day they're having, are they going to court later, are they working, you know, on research, you might preface it with, I don't want to get into any client confidences, but can you tell me generally what you're working on today? I think that, on my behalf, that might have avoided the alarm that this attorney expressed to me.
How dare you?
Yeah. Yeah, the goal is not to alarm the
Right.
Yeah.
Shock the conscience.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Obviously, obviously a 20 or 30-minute interview is not a long time, and it can fly by pretty quickly. Aside from the maybe fairly obvious question of do I want to hire this person, what are some of the bottom line questions that come to mind when you're talking to someone for such a short amount of time?
So do you mean the bottom line questions that go unanswered, meaning that we're answering for ourselves?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. What are some things you hope to take away from the interview?
I want to get work ethic, willingness to learn, willingness to work with people from different backgrounds, and communication skills. That's what I'm looking for.
I'm sort of more holistic. Same ideas generally, but it's a more holistic. Do I take from 30 minutes with this person that spending 30 hours with this person over the course of a month wouldn't be terrible, right? As Carol mentioned earlier, you're in the offices of our firm for a callback, which means that your resume indicates that you can walk and chew gum in the way that our firm requires you to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? So that we don't know that you can do that until you get there and start doing it, but every indicator suggests that you can. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, because I can't differentiate between your resume and your resume as to who's ultimately going to be the smarter, more sophisticated lawyer, because who knows. But I can figure out probably over the course of 5 or 6 conversations amongst myself and my colleagues and you, whether we're going to get along as a team and as a group. And as Nicole mentioned earlier about good team experiences, bad team experiences, the worst thing in the world in a law firm environment is a bad team experience, as far as I'm concerned. Because you're spending a lot of time with these people on fairly high stress, high important work to your clients who are all counting on you to get something done. And if you can't be collaborative and cooperative because of a personality quirk or just whatever it is, then it's not going to work out long term. So I'm trying to figure out, can I spend time with you? Are we going to be a good fit if you and I happen to be in the bunker together for a couple of months on a matter? So.
Thank you.
Was there a question over here?
Yeah, so I met with an attorney recently, and we had a really good conversation, and we had a lot in common about like art and media that we like. And we had a really great conversation, but most of the questions were just pitched at me, and we had a great time. But I walked away and was like, wow, that was such a nice conversation. Oh my gosh, I didn't ask a single thing or demonstrate that I had looked into this program and that I was excited about this practice area. And I'm wondering how you sort of, if it's worth it to just go with like the flow of the conversation when it's going well and you're connecting on
other things, or if you should try to shoehorn, by the way, I did look into you and I'm really interested in this.
I think that's fine. I've had many interviews where I didn't give the candidate time to ask any questions, so we're leaving the room and I say, if you have any other questions, any questions, you can call me because the time's up. And so that candidate, if he or she had prepared a specific question for me based on my, bio, that I guess that would have been wasted. But I think it's okay if the flow is that you're answering the questions and there's more questions coming because your interviewer is interested in what you're saying. I would take that as a good sign. It's okay.
Absolutely.
So the thing is, I tend to always be the last callback interview on the schedule because I have a time meter with these things. So I'm the guy that if you put me at the first interview in the morning, everybody else's day is screwed up because I took 45 minutes as opposed to my allotted 30. And I couldn't more strongly be in agreement with that. Do not try to shoehorn stuff in an interview that otherwise is going really well. If you have a great conversation, you're connecting on a personal level about music you like or art that you like or sports teams that you like, whatever it is, the connection is much more important than you saying, oh, and by the way, I read your article on oil and gas leases, and if you did, wonderful, good prep, but it's not natural, it's not organic. Let it be that. So.
Could the burning question then be addressed in like a thank you in writing?
Yes. Yep.
My question goes a little bit to what Mr. Ben was talking about, how everyone brings their portfolio in with a pen, and how much is appropriate to take notes, and how much is, because you don't want to be sitting there scrolling throughout the entire interview, obviously, but I don't know what you feel the appropriate balance is.
So I do think it's appropriate to take notes. I happen to be a note taker. I go nowhere without this, and I've taken some notes even as I've been sitting here. So as long as it's not distracting from the flow of the conversation, it's fine. So if there's something in particular that you want to jot down because you want to make sure that you ask about it or a follow-up, or it's something that seems really important to you that you didn't know that we had, this women's steering committee and this new this new program that we're doing, and you just make yourself a quick little note, that's fine. But it shouldn't be like a lecture, right? So where you're trying to write down what the person is saying, because the eye contact and the communication is what's really important. And so I think a lot of people bring these with them because it's like a security blanket, which is fine as long as you don't play with it. But there's also, I oftentimes have not almost all the time, but more often than not, the interviewees will ask me if I want a copy of their resume. We have a whole machine at Baker that makes sure that I have your resume and your writing sample and your right.
No, I know
so
you
don't
to
need
bring
to
it.
offer that to people. They have that, unless it's a non-functioning law firm.
I know you should bring it, but we have it.
We'll ask for it. Don't offer it up.
Yeah. So just the most important thing is what you just talked about, which is to be engaged in a conversation. And if what you're doing distracts from your ability to be engaged in the conversation, then it's a negative. If it's an aid to your ability to be engaged in the conversation, then it's a positive.
I want to say that the only thing about taking notes, and I think it's a good idea because it helps you to remember things. Carol kind of alluded to this before, but you're all interviewing us while we're interviewing you, right? I mean, we're bringing you in because we have a desire to see if we want to hire you, and you have an equal desire to see if you want to work with us. So if I answer a question in your first sort of interview session that raises either an issue about what the firm is like or what the practice area you're interested in has going on, write it down and ask everybody else you're interviewing with that day that question. Because if I tell you, oh, we're an open door firm and everybody loves each other and I see my partner's kids on the weekends all the time. If I tell you that and everybody else is like, nah, we just go home. I don't even know where Matt lives. If that's, you want to get the idea that you're getting consistent, truthful answers from people because you are also interviewing us. You're going to have options. Make sure that you're giving yourself the best possible sort of framework within which to make your decisions about those options.
So as a practical matter, Carol and Matt, if someone were taking notes, would you suggest that they do it on paper?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God.
No, none of the tablets, telephones, no.
I'd be afraid you were recording me if your phone was on. Honestly.
I want to have one of his interviews recorded, actually. Sounds like fun.
Oh, God.
I think
would be so fired.
I think that should...
Follow up because I think someone on a phone would be an instant red flag. Right?
Yeah, just don't do it. It's like we said about the conservative attire. I know paper's a conservative way to take notes, but it's the one that belongs in this setting.
Great. Any other questions?
Obviously, we're trying to be
think sometimes it does, and that's, for example, if you don't have any follow-up. Like you tell me a story, and then I ask you to tell a little more, and you're just stumped. It sounds like maybe that story wasn't really meaningful to you, or maybe you've said it so many times that it's just a recital at this point. So I think that's a good question, and that's a real concern as a student, that you want to look genuine. So how hard do I have to work to look genuine? It's kind of a conundrum. But if you've got a good answer and you've told it before, tell it again if it's a good story about you and it demonstrates why you'd be a good hire.
The same dilemma that litigators face, right? For example, you want your opening statement to be absolutely perfect and polished, and not to sound absolutely perfect and polished. It's a skill that you have to learn over time. So that it's a balancing act between, just like the same balancing act between being very self-confident and being a jerk. You have to kind of figure out where that line is.
So when I used to litigate, but I'm reformed, but when I used to litigate, I would write things.
Litigation is the best practice
It
area,
is.
in
It's the
case
best.
anybody was wondering.
That's why we went to law school.
Except the woman who had to buy a suit in an emergency situation. I used to write everything that I had to either present either to a client or in an argument or to a court in bullet points. I never wrote it out longhand, full narrative, never. And so when you're thinking about the answers you have to a particular set of questions or the information you want to convey, at least for me, it was helpful to have the basic substructure of the story or the answer, whatever it is, in my case, the argument, the brief, in my head so that I could refer to the bullet points, but each time I would do it, it was slightly different because you can't say the exact same thing over and over and over again without sounding sort of like an automaton, right? And so for me, it was just don't necessarily write out longhand everything you're going to say or think in terms of the exact precise answer you're going to give to the question over and over again, but just the basic underpinnings of what your answer would be. And at least that always helped me to sort of be a little more fluid, a little more organic when I was doing stuff.
Thank you.
You should also, practice with each other. And if you're uncomfortable in that setting, that'll help you be more comfortable when you're actually in the official interview. Just get a buddy and interview them, have them interview you, and see what it feels like.
Concur with that. Practice makes perfect.
Given my friends, that would not have been productive.
You have to do it without beer in your hand.
That's right.
Any other final questions?
One last one. One question that I was wanting to ask is sort of get at culture, which is hard to. I wanted to ask what non-monetary incentives do you use to incentivize your employees or to motivate your employees? Is that a good question? Would I get any useful information from that? Is that too far out there?
I think it's a great question, and
Yeah.
people will talk about, for example, if they have a wellness initiative or if they have, what kind of social events the attorneys do together. I think that's a good question, and it does get a little bit at the relationships, which, like I said, is important to us. And so if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, I think you would elicit some helpful information on that with that kind of question.
I might frame it a little differently, though, and not frame it in terms of what are your non-monetary incentives for employees, because when you said that, my question was, well, what benefits do we give the employees that aren't their salary and benefits? I mean, nobody gets a car if they bill an extra 40 hours. We don't, none of that stuff kind of
You would
happens.
say ways or programs.
What other aspects of the firm do you think are beneficial to your associates and your lawyers? What, aside from compensation, cash-wise, what's good about being a lawyer at Voorhees? What do you like about being a part of that environment and being a part of that firm? I might frame the question that way, because I think that does get more at, why do I work the place that I worked for 15 years? It's because I like the people or whatever it is. And that, Carol, why did you join Baker when you left the U.S. Attorney's Office with all the options in the world, right? What would have been her answer to that question, I think, would be much more interesting than what kinds of things does Baker institutionally do to make its associates happy, right? Like that's a different framework. So if you want culture, you can even ask it specifically that way. So how would you describe the culture of your law firm?
Thank you.
All right. So I don't know. I know we went a little over. You may not have time to stick around based on your busy schedules. But do you think you might have a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.